Today's episode is brought to you by Hellbender Vinyl, the only vinyl pressing plant in Pittsburgh and one of just 3 in all of Pennsylvania. At Hellbender Vinyl, they're turning artists' dream into reality one record at a time. Imagine watching your music come to life as that warm, spinning disc goes around and around on the player with your new release. Hellbender Vinyl isn't your average pressing plant. From eye-catching custom designs like splatters, swirls, and 10-inch records to unique features like locked grooves, they do it all with a level of quality that shows their musicians and label owners too. And if you're new to vinyl, they've got you covered. Their team is known for making the process simple and approachable, so you can bring your art to life without feeling overwhelmed. So if you're ready to take your music beyond the digital and hold it in your hands, check out Hellbender Vinyl at hellbendervinyl.com and let them help you press something unforgettable. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label. So here's how this podcast works. Every other week, I interview a record label, and you're supposed to take some didactic tips from those conversations, some insights and some good ideas that we can kind of all steal and borrow and lend to each other. That's the purpose of the interviews. And then on the off weeks, I like to focus on a specific topic of running a record label or being an independent musician, promoting music, making music, all of that fun stuff. And these episodes that I'm doing today, I tend to put in 2 different buckets. One would be like tactical, practical tips, and the other would be more philosophical, macro, big picture things. And the reason why I kind of tend to lean towards the philosophical side of things is because, first of all, I don't think a lot of people are doing that. I think it's pretty easy to Google how to get your music on streaming services. But it's harder to find inspiration and to find encouragement. And I feel like the music industry is a tough place to be. And I want to communicate to you why I think it's really important for you to exist as a record label, why I think more people should start record labels, why I think you have the right as a record label owner to own a record label, to own a successful record label, and to make a living in the music space. I think that's our right, and I want to encourage you and inspire you to keep going. The other bucket is practical. It's didactic tips. It's things like, it's a steps 1, 2, 3. And I recently had an email a couple of weeks ago, and somebody wanted some more episodes of just really back to basics, like teaching me how to do things. And so it's a nice little reminder, because I really do enjoy the inspirational side of things, the macro of being in this space. But today we're going to go right back to basics with how to get your music on streaming platforms. Now, this might be common knowledge to some of you, to a lot of you, but for some people out there, and believe it or not, we have a lot of new music industry people in our community, people who are sniffing around, thinking about starting a record label. And there's a lot of things that might be obvious to some of us that are not obvious to other people. And that's who today's episode is for. If you have been running a record label for a long time and you know how to get your music on streaming platforms, I think there's still something to be learned today. So please don't hang up the phone. I think there is something that will encourage you and will just remind you, like, oh yeah, probably should be doing that. Or maybe there's a little bit of a history here in the streaming world or in the digital music space that you've forgotten about or overlooked. Let's go through, I think today we'll cover 5 chapters in how to get your music on streaming platforms. Let's start with number 1, which is just a basic overview. What do I mean, streaming platforms? Well, the streaming sites, as you're probably most familiar with today, would be Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, Tidal, and the list goes on and on. Those are kind of the big ones, especially in the Western world. But there are massive ones in China, and every country really kind of has their own. Even if it's not as like super popular as Spotify. I believe probably for the most part, Spotify might be the most popular, although I think there is one in China that might be bigger. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's what I mean when I'm referring to streaming sites. Now, there's other ways that you can consume, that music fans can consume digital music. There's Bandcamp, which is not necessarily a streaming site, although you can stream the songs before you buy them, but you can't camp out there forever and listen to an album infinitely. Well, at least I don't think you can. The point is that is a digital platform where you sell digital music and you are buying the files. It's very similar to going back to the old days of like eMusic, or iTunes was the first and most popular. And you'd buy one song for 99 cents. You'd download that MP3 to your computer and you would essentially own that file forever, although it did have some limitations. And then it was like $9.99 for a full album. Today, we've kind of shifted more towards the streaming platforms where you're essentially renting music. You're paying $9.99 a month and you get access to every recorded song in history. But when you stop paying that, you lose access to those songs. There's some other ways that we stream music, SoundCloud, for example, and that kind of started off as a way to stream music for free. Even some artists can upload their music to their own website using just a free player or like a Squarespace streaming player. There's really no money to be made in that format, but you can stream music that way. There's non-interactive, where that means that the music listener doesn't have a choice at what song comes next. And that's things like satellite radio or Pandora. I want to just clarify, on this podcast, in our community, we often talk about the difference between digital music and physical music, or digital media and physical media. And that's obvious to most people, but to some people it isn't, I've learned. And so let me just clarify. Digital would be the way that you receive, or the music fan receives music. And so that would be through digital files, like downloading on iTunes or Bandcamp, or streaming that digital music through their computers, through their phones, through places like Spotify and Apple Music. And then there's physical, and that would just mean kind of like being able to hold their music collection. So vinyl, of course, old vinyl, new vinyl, CDs, cassettes. That's the difference when I'm talking about digital music and physical music. Now, we think that a great business model includes all of those things. It includes streaming and digital downloads, but it also includes a way for fans to physically touch and collect their music. That's something that they're very passionate about. In fact, most music fans are quite passionate about both sides, digital and physical. They like the convenience and the affordability and the accessibility of digital, but they also like to have something intimate and personal. They like the ritual of physical media. And so that's what we're talking about when we split digital and physical. Now, you might be thinking, if you really want to get nerdy on me and say, well, what if somebody records music into their laptop, then burns that MP3 to a CD? That whole process is digital, but the CD is physical. But you know what I mean? It's just like bringing music into the physical world out of computers and phones. Chapter 2, digital distribution. Okay, so you're a music fan and you open up Spotify and you see all the albums. How did those songs get there? How does an independent record label get their music onto these platforms? Well, you need a third party. You can't do it yourself, and Spotify won't do it for you. In fact, they tested that out for like a couple of months where you could upload music directly to Spotify. It was a complete failure because it didn't take into account the fact that most people would want their music on other platforms as well, not just exclusively on Spotify. It's not a great business model for an artist or a record label. And for whatever reason, they got rid of that. There was a way in the old days to kind of like submit to become a distributor to iTunes, but it was a very difficult process and it wasn't really accessible to the average person. So if you are asking the question, why do I need a digital distributor? Why can't I just go upload directly to Spotify? The answer is you can't. You just can't. Maybe one day that'll change, but today it's not very easy to do. You need a digital distributor. This is also referred to as an aggregator. And so this would be people like DistroKid, Symphonic, CD Baby, Amuse, if you've ever heard of some of these platforms before. And so what they do is they offer a service where they'll either pay you per album, you pay them per album, or you pay them monthly or annually. Then you upload your music and your art files and your metadata, which we'll talk about in a second, to their website. They make sure that everything is like formatted properly, and then they deliver it on the release date that you've assigned. They deliver it to all of the platforms. These aggregators are great because really, I mean, if you wanted to be your own digital distributor, if you're not using some sort of like third-party white label thing, like you would have to figure out how to upload your music and keep your music relevant to the needs of like all multiple thousand streaming platforms and download platforms all over the world. And so if you use a platform like CD Baby or Symphonic, they keep up to date with that. And so if a new one pops up and you've already uploaded your album to one of these aggregators, to one of these distributors, they will automatically release that music to any new streaming platforms that pop up anywhere in the world. And so they're kind of convenient. They operate on two different business models. The original business model, and it goes all the way back to someone like CD Baby, is you would pay per album or per single. So back in the day, it was like maybe $8 or $9 per song, or like for a single. And then if it was an EP or an album, it was like something like $35. And then maybe there would be a fee for a UPC code, which I'll talk about in a second. And so it was pay per use. And so it was a little bit expensive and a little bit prohibitive to being prolific. But the model there was that once you paid that $35 fee to have an album uploaded, it was up on the streaming platforms or iTunes or whatever for the rest of your life. Even if you died, it would still be up there being played, making money. Whereas the newer model, and something that someone like DistroKid came up with maybe 10 or 15 years ago, ironically, by the guy who founded CD Baby, sold CD Baby, and then like co-founded or started DistroKid with a completely different model, which was a subscription model, meaning you could pay $9.99 a month, or you could pay $150 or whatever per year, and you could upload unlimited music. You could upload an album a day if you wanted to, and you would no longer be charged this one-time fee. They would provide you with your barcode, with your ISRCs, which we'll talk about in a second, and you could upload all the music you wanted. However, if you stopped paying this monthly subscription price, or you stopped paying this annual fee, then the album would disappear from all the streaming platforms. And so you had to continue to pay that monthly or annual subscription, even if the album wasn't making any money, to keep it up there forever. And if you just decided, well, I can't afford it, it's not making any sense because nobody's playing it, it's a 10-year-old album, I've now maybe already paid $1,000 over the past couple of years to keep this album up there. It's not making sense. It's not making any money. You delete it. And then like the one or two people who were actually enjoying it in their Spotify or Apple Music library, that album just disappears. They don't have access to it anymore. So that was that's the new model. And most people have been going to that model. Why? Because it just locks people into a subscription. And for them, from a business standpoint, they can just have a more predictable revenue stream. CD Baby, interestingly, still does the per use model. So it's interesting that like both still exist. I'm not going to tell you which one's better. I will tell you this, though. It's very interesting. When I started this podcast about 7 or 8 years ago, there was kind of like a rumor that Spotify was receiving about 20,000 songs per day. So 20,000 songs were uploaded to Spotify per day. And that was about 7 years ago. As I've been doing this show, every year that number gets bigger and bigger. I don't know if that's just some sort of like industry myth or old wives' tales where it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, the story. But we're now today where people say that over 100,000 songs per day are uploaded to Spotify, which is intimidating and kind of annoying. And that's like, well, maybe that's why I'm not getting on playlists anymore, or why I'm not making less money is because there's so much music out there. I attribute that entirely to this new business model where you could pay $10 a month and you could fart into a microphone and upload that to Spotify and it would be released the next day. And there's really nothing stopping you. Now, Spotify is trying to crack down a little bit on garbage tracks like, white noise and stuff that people are uploading because it's entirely accessible. So if you go back to that original CD Baby model, if you're paying $35 plus maybe $10 for a barcode, if you're paying like close to $50, you have to stop and think, is this album is this a legit album? Is it worth $50 to get up on the streaming platforms? Nowadays, you can just upload anything because you're paying a subscription. So that's kind of why we're seeing so much stuff being uploaded. It's good in one sense. It's kind of made it a free market, democratized music distribution. That's a good thing, but it also kind of comes with a little bit of a consequence. Now, how do you pick a digital distributor? I'm not going to recommend one. I personally have used a lot of them. And in my opinion, they've all kind of just done the trick. Most of the reputable ones. I will tell you this, because, we've experimented with like kind of up and coming distributors, and it's, in one case, it went south pretty poorly. My friend Sam at Complete Music Update in the UK recommended me this interesting thing. I don't have the link in front of me, but Spotify has a list of preferred partners, meaning they are digital distributors, aggregators that they highly recommend and that they have kind of vetted on your behalf. And so all you have to do is Google like Spotify preferred distributors and it'll come up. It's on their website and it'll list like their preferred people. And CD Baby's there, Symphonics there, a lot of the great distributors that you've heard of. And so if you want to ask me which one is best, I mean, look at their features, look at their pricing, kind of you pick what you think is good. There's a lot of times where distributors will offer extra services, like meaning that they'll do some things for you that maybe a label would do or a publicist would do. However, it either costs you more money to do that, or you have to apply to their, like a partner program where they'll only accept artists or labels that have a big catalog and that shows some sort of promise of actually making the money, making it worth their time to provide you with some sort of label or marketing services. And so I've spoke to a lot of people here who start a record label, applied to like the Symphonic program or there's one, CD Baby has one, I can't remember what it's called. It's like creative services or creator services. Anyway, they've applied and they've been denied. And for whatever reason, usually you just need to have a track record. You need to show that, hey, like, our releases have, if you're an independent artist and you've been self-releasing music on a platform and you're actually doing pretty well, you have 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 monthly listeners, then you'll probably get accepted into one of these programs. If you're a record label and you have zero releases, zero track record, you're going to have to release your music on your own through one of these aggregators before you can apply for one of these to be kind of like a preferred label with them. So don't worry about that. Final note on the digital distribution side, you're going to hear these barcodes, which are also called UPCs. And then you're going to hear something called ISRCs, which stands for International Standard Recording Code. So a UPC, Unique Product Code, and an ISRC, International Standard Recording Code. It's very simple. A UPC is referring to a product that somebody could buy, whether physical or digital. If it's physical, it's a CD. If it's digital, it's just a selection of 9 songs that make up one album, or 9 songs that they stream that makes up one album. So a barcode is needed for that product, whether it's a cereal box, it's a pair of sneakers, it's a vinyl record, or a digital album. It needs one barcode for that product. Then you have international standard recording codes, which are individual numbers that also include letters. They're very long, and they are assigned to each track. So let me explain it like this. If you release a 10-song album on iTunes, each song will have its own ISRC. So that means the album will have 10 ISRCs. However, the album itself will only need one UPC, one barcode. And that album will only have one barcode and 10 ISRCs. So an album that's released will have one barcode and 10 ISRCs. Now, here's where it gets kind of funny, ironic, tricky. If you release a single, just one song, it's just like a debut single, whatever, no album in sight, just one song. That release is a product. So it therefore needs a unique product code, and it needs a barcode. So that one single needs one ISRC because of the track. And then because it's just a single, it's a product, it also needs a UPC. So where do you get these? 99% of digital distributors will give them to you for free or for a fee. So you upload your songs, each song automatically gets an ISRC, and the release itself automatically gets a barcode. On CD Baby, I think they charge you for the barcodes. Some of the subscription platforms, they give you one for free. It automatically becomes yours. Once it's assigned to an album, same with the ISRCs, once it's assigned to an album, then it is yours forever and it'll never be reused. And you can't reuse it on future albums. It's always assigned to that album. You can buy these online. You can Google and buy barcodes in bulk, and you can buy ISRCs in bulk if you want to have your own. It doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't really matter. I mean, honestly, if I buy my own, I just have to keep track of them in a spreadsheet. So I find that to be a bit arduous. So don't worry too much about it. Chapter 3 is digital assets. Okay, so what do I mean by digital assets? So How are you going to get your music? We know how you're going to get your music on streaming platforms. We're going to use a digital distributor, an aggregator, which I just talked about. But what do you need? What do you need to provide them? What do they require for you to successfully release an album or a single? There's three things: the audio, the artwork, and the metadata. The audio is very simple. If you or the artist or your mastering engineer is preparing the master files, so the final produced track, it is a WAV file. It is not an MP3. It's a high quality WAV file from your mastering engineer or from the artist. They need to provide you with that in the proper track order. I like to label every master WAV file with the track name, the artist name, the release name, and the track number. I honestly almost don't even care about the song title. It's more important that I have the track listing. So I'll say track 01 and then the song title. And before that, I'll name the artist and the album and maybe even a catalog ID, just so that there's no confusion, so that the file name actually has all of that important information in it. So if you're releasing one single, you just need the mastering engineer or the artist to send you the high quality WAV file with whatever information in the file name is possible. If it's an album, like I said, it should be in a folder with all 5 or 6 or 9 or whatever songs in WAV format and clearly identifying which song is which. If they mess up and they send you just a bunch of unnamed audio files and you've got to figure out which song is which and which in what order it goes into, that's a huge problem. And so your mastering engineer or the artist should be able to provide you with that. Then you need artwork. And now artwork is actually something that you have to consider. And really, it's only a square for digital purposes. It's just like a square graphic. And it really can be anything. There are some exceptions, though. Most digital distributors and most streaming platforms do not like things like logos on the front, explicit sticker, although some like hip hop styles can get away with it, but they really don't like you putting that parental guidance sticker on it anymore. A record label logo, they don't like, unless it's like a classic looking jazz cover, then you might be able to get away with it. You can't put any marketing stuff on it, like new album out soon or like brand new single from such and such. You can't put that on the cover. That just doesn't look very professional, like a price, a web URL, a QR code. You can't do any of that. You could maybe, like you can try it, but it might get rejected during the digital distribution ingestion process. They might say, you know what, we don't like this. So stay away from that. It has to be high resolution. I mean, approximately 3,000 by 3,000 pixels, but I think you might want to go up higher, like 5,000 or 6,000 by 6,000. Basically, you can't have like a low res file. The reason being is like, you're probably thinking, well, why does it matter? I mean, most people just look at this tiny little square on their phone or on their computer, on their laptop. Why does it need to be high resolution? Well, actually, a lot of people listen to music on their televisions, on their smart TVs, and they use like the Spotify or Apple TV, Apple Music app, in which case on like a 60-inch television, the artwork is blown up quite large. And so they do like to have a large version of your album cover, and then they shrink it down to whatever device it's being used on. And so you can use Canva, or your graphic designer should provide you with a high resolution JPEG of the album cover. You may also want to have press photos for the bands too, because places like Apple Music and Spotify for artists will allow you to upload a artist photo as well. And then there's the metadata, which simply means the important information about the release: the artist name, the album title, the year that it was released, the genre that it is, maybe even the subgenre that it is, the songwriters for each song, the lyrics for each song can be included in a lot of the streaming platforms, like if you include lyrics nowadays. What else? I mean, even some songs, they like to have the key or the BPM for it. There's really like almost an infinite amount of metadata that you can include. I like to have, kind of like a Google Doc or a spreadsheet that just has like all the possible information that I could have for an album or for a song, so that when I'm submitting this song to my digital distributor, when they ask for lyrics, I have it there. I can copy and paste. When they ask for who the songwriter is or multiple songwriters, I have it there. I can copy it, blah, blah, blah. Publishing info, all of that information. to make this easy for you, because that's a little bit daunting. I mean, at the very least, you need artist name, song name, track listing, etc. But to make this a little easier for you, I do have a free metadata checklist that you can download. Just go to otherrecordlabels.com/metadata. Chapter 4 is making money on these streaming platforms, the hardest part. So how does payment work? Okay, so a music fan will stream your song a couple times or your artist song a couple times on Spotify or Apple Music. That gets registered as a play, and then Spotify has a rate in which they will pay you for every play. It's very, very, very low, and it's actually quite fluid. So if somebody is paying using like a full family subscription or a full like $9.99 Spotify subscription, then their stream is worth more than somebody who's using the free tier of Spotify, who's just listening to ads. So somebody listens to your album and they're not paying for their Spotify subscription, then them listening to your music is making you less money than somebody who's paying for a subscription. It's not the case on Apple Music. On Apple Music, every play is essentially the same. However, there are differences in different countries. And so you make more when somebody from the US plays your music than, let's say, from another country in the East somewhere. So I don't really know how that works, why that works, how currencies affect all of that. But basically, it's to say there isn't a flat rate. It's not like you're getting a 10th of a penny or a 100th of a penny for every stream across the board, whether it happens in Afghanistan or it happens in America. It's not the case. It's all over the place. I feel like it's changing all the time. It drives me nuts. But that's just how it happens. So at the end of the month, all of these streams will get reported to your digital distributor. And some of them will be digital downloads from iTunes. Some of them will be like just all sorts of payments from all of these strange streaming platforms and digital download platforms all over the world. And so at the end of the month, if you have one release, you'll look and say, look, it made all of this. We got all of these plays in all these different countries on all these different platforms. And the total that we get is, let's say, $100. Now, let me tell you a little anecdote. When I first started releasing music digitally and understanding that, coming from the world where you would sell a CD for $10 or $20, and then you would never make any money off of that same CD for the rest of your life. A music fan would pay $20 at a show for a CD, and they could listen to it for the next 50 years, and the artist wouldn't get any more than they got the day that CD was sold, which is fine. That's how the music industry worked. When I started seeing that some of my digital music that was out there was making I think my first album and EP that was on streaming platforms made me $35 for that month. And even though that's not enough money to pay for a dinner out, I was still really excited. And the entrepreneur in me was like, wait a second, one album or two albums is making $35 a month. I just need to release more albums. I need to release 10x that, and now I'm doing okay. And that was kind of my approach some 15 years ago, and I've still been doing that. I've been prolific as an artist, trying to release singles and covers and EPs and albums and live albums and acoustic version albums and remix albums, just to try to continue to release more and more stuff so that kind of monthly payment. So if you're a record label and you're looking at one release that's only making a couple dollars a month or a couple $100 a month, just think, once you're a record label that has 10 releases, 100 releases, then you should be making several hundred, several $1,000s a month, even if it's not that much money. So that money goes to your digital distributor. Some digital distributors take a little bit of a cut, and then they should be paying you monthly or quarterly or whenever they've agreed to pay you. Usually it's monthly. Sometimes you have to click a button to say, okay, I want you to pay me. They store all the money in this kind of in your account. And then you're like, okay, go ahead and pay me. And they pay you usually through something like PayPal. Now, there is a bit of a delay in reporting, so just be aware, and you should tell your artist to be aware of this as well. If somebody streams your music in November, that may not actually get reported from Spotify to your digital distributor until something like January or February. They're usually 2 to 3 months behind in their reporting. And so if you release a new album in September and you get all of these streams, you may not actually see how many of those streams happened and how much money you actually made until the end of the year or into the new year. So just be prepared for that. Don't expect that you're going to start getting a payment as soon as the album is played or at the end of that month. It doesn't really work that way. One other thing I want to mention, because I get asked this all the time, is when you're looking for a digital distributor, a lot of record labels and a lot of artists, but particularly a lot of independent record labels, are looking for track splits. They're looking for payment splits, and that they're looking for a digital distributor that allows for payment splits. This is a problem. I'm going to tell you why. So you might think, what is a payment split? Okay, so I know that Symphonic does this. I know DistroKid does this. A lot of platforms are looking into doing this. If you're a band, let's say you have 4 members in the band, you upload an album, you're independent, you don't have a record label, you don't have a manager, you upload your album, and then you can add each band member to receive 25% of the royalties for that album. Or if you have like a primary songwriter, maybe she receives 50% and then the other 2 band members receive 25% each, something like that. You can determine however it works. So basically, this means that all the money doesn't just come to one band member and you're hoping that your drummer is going to do the monthly math and send you a check or give you cash. That's problematic, right? For most bands, like they're not in a good position to do that. It gets a little bit sticky, a little bit tricky. So some of these platforms offer these track splits. Now, oftentimes it involves like those people being members of the website. So they kind of have to pay a membership fee or at least sign up. It's a little bit, I don't love it for that reason, but here's the big reason why independent record labels should completely disregard this. The reason being is that you as a record label are likely incurring costs and expenses when you're releasing and promoting a record. So if you release a record by band X, then presumably you've done some purchases for this or promotions for this album, things like hiring a photographer, perhaps hiring a mastering engineer. Maybe you have made CDs or made vinyl that needs to be recouped. And so you need to receive all of the revenue, 100% of the revenue, to make sure that you've paid off some of these expenses before you start to pay royalties. This is how it works. Usually, expenses need to be recouped, which means you need to make the expenses back that you've spent on promoting and making this record before anybody, including the record label, gets their royalties. And so you can't do that if the money, if the gross is split at the digital distributor. So it's important that you do not do these track splits as a record label, that the money, all the money comes to you as a record label, and that you use a platform like Infinite Catalog, or you use just a basic spreadsheet to spend, to deduct the expenses from that gross number and then pay the artist their royalty based on what is left over. And in some cases, there's nothing left over because it takes a couple of months or even a year or more to pay back some of the expenses like a mastering engineer, press photos. Maybe you hired a publicist. So you might have $5,000 worth of expenses of making this album and promoting this album. So all of the money that's made from Spotify and Apple Music and Bandcamp needs to come to you to pay back that $5,000 before the artist gets anything. Does that make sense? So that's why we don't use track splits if you're a record label. And finally, number 5 is playlists. This is a big question in the digital streaming world. How do you get on playlists? Well, and what are playlists? So there's 3 types of playlists that are most common: algorithmic playlists, editorial playlists, and UGP, which stands for user-generated playlists, which basically just means regular everyday people making their own playlists. So an algorithmic playlist is really actually where you might have some of the most success. And that's where you release a lot of music as an artist, and a platform like Spotify and Amazon gets to know you, gets to know the music, gets to know listeners who like your music. This happens all the time on Pandora, where they know just through the data that they have and even just kind of like the sonic fingerprint of your music, that a music fan who likes these 50 artists are probably going to like your music. And so somewhere like Spotify will generously add your song to a radio station, like in the Pandora days, where somebody will hear your song because it sounds like other things they've listened to in the past. And hopefully they're like, hey, what is this? And then they maybe look up your artist name, or they add that song to their library. And so algorithmic is pretty cool. There's really no way for you to kind of guarantee that to happen, but it is starting to happen slowly. And I think it's really more about just an artist who've been on the platform for a couple of years and to the point where they have multiple releases, and Spotify learns about what type of people listen to their music, and eventually, hopefully, you can be placed on one of these playlists. The hardest type of playlist to get on is an editorial playlist. And so on places like Spotify and Amazon, when you have an album in queue or a single in queue ready to be released, meaning you've uploaded it to your digital distributor a couple of months before it comes out, and it's now sitting in your Spotify for Artists account. So if you don't know what Spotify for Artists account means, ask your digital distributor. They can give you access. So basically you get to see in the back end of who's listening to your music, what playlists have been placed on. Amazon has a similar tool. Apple Music has a similar tool as well. And so you can go into your Spotify for Artists and you can pitch your upcoming song to these editors. And now it's really tough. And like I said at the beginning, more and more music is being released. So they're being inundated with more and more pitches. But if you have a good track record, if this artist has a good track record, if you've appeared on editorial playlists means official Spotify playlists, then you have a chance of being listened to and being considered. And perhaps your distributor is representing you and is pitching on your behalf. That helps as well. They'll be more likely to listen to your distributor and say, you should check out this release. I've been on a lot of editorial playlists. I've made a lot of money. I've made a lot of fans. But it's getting harder and harder. And I have songs that are still on editorial playlists that have been there for a couple of years, but I haven't got a fresh editorial playlist in maybe 2 or 3 years. It's been really tough. Things have been a lot more competitive. And so just a heads up, it's like the hardest thing to get on. But if you get on it, it's great. And then the final kind of playlist is user-generated playlists, which means if you make a playlist that's like road trip, 2025 road trip songs, or like falling asleep music. Some people make nice little artwork for their music, for their playlists, and they use their social media following to get more people, or they pay ads to get more people to follow their playlists. And then you contact these playlist curators, and you can use a tool like Groover, who we've used in the past, and pitch your song to these influencers to be included on one of their playlists. Or you can just ask your friends, like, hey, if you have any playlists that are appropriate for this new single I've released, please add it. Because some of these, like getting added to some of your friends' playlists and some of these other influencers' playlists, eventually Spotify will notice that if your song is being added to 150 to 150 different playlists that are into these independent playlist curators, the algorithm will eventually notice that. And so it's probably the most accessible for you is to go and look for some of these playlists to submit to. Some of them are payola. Some of them will ask you for money. And I don't really see the benefit in that. I haven't really seen, by that, I mean, I don't mean like paying Groover or Submit Hub to submit to them. I mean, like they've said, I will include your song, but it's going to cost you $10. It's going to cost you $100. I don't like that. It's a bad habit, and I don't know if you're going to make your money back. So, if you've been successful doing that, please let me know. I'm kind of curious, but most people have not, and it's not a good way to do it. There are other playlists that just like to curate great music and great playlists, and they'll include you if they like your stuff. If they don't like your stuff, then there's nothing you can do. That's the basics of getting your music on streaming platforms. By the way, as I talked about at the beginning of this episode, when you are releasing music, there's 2 ways to do it. There's the digital way and there's the physical way. And in my opinion, a great record label does both. We've just talked about the digital side of things, but there is a whole world that music fans love, and that is the physical world, which we haven't talked about today. We touched on a little bit. And to get your music on streaming platforms is a great accomplishment, and it's something that I think that everybody should do, including Bandcamp and SoundCloud and YouTube and whatever. But I also think that a lot of record labels need to consider making physical releases, because I think they work really well together. I think a great vinyl record that you put on your turntable, that a music fan sits down in their living room with a cup of tea and listens to your album on their stereo, is a ritual. It's a beautiful experience. And collecting records and shopping for records and sniffing records is a great experience that I love. But I also love the digital world. I love hopping in the car, plugging in my phone, and listening to whatever album is in my newest edition in my Apple Music library. I like that convenience. I like going for a run and syncing my AirPods to my watch and listening to whatever album I'm listening to. But there's nothing better than dropping the needle on a vinyl or going to a record store and getting this massive record, this massive physical representation of your album. So I do think you should consider both as record labels. And if you're thinking about getting into pressing vinyl, then why don't you talk to our sponsor, Hellbender Vinyl? They are a brand new pressing plant. And what's so great about them is that they're music fans, they're musicians, and they're record label owners. And so if you find the process of making vinyl to be an intimidating one, if you're scared, if you don't know what to do, these guys will help you out. They'll hold your hand. They'll explain everything. They're kind of the best for people like us who want to get into vinyl. So go to hellbendervinyl.com, and thanks to them for sponsoring today's episode. If you want more resources on streaming platforms, just go to otherrecordlabels.com/streaming, where I'll put together all of my resources for getting your music on digital platforms. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this kind of back to basics episode has been helpful, inspiring, educational for you. Thanks for listening.